The 1980s are filled with some of the most gnarly moments in U.S. history. From the finding of the Great Titanic, which sank in the morning of April 15, 1912, during its maiden voyage, to the introduction of The Little Mermaid and Tubular Macintosh. Throughout the decade, defining moments like the crash of the Challenger and introduction of the revolutionary Rubik's Cube have come together to help shape the opinions and overall identity of the 1980s. We chose the items on our mural for specific reasons, to accurately depict the defining moments of this decade. Our first component is the finding of the Titanic. Robert Ballard had struggled to find the Titanic, and on September 1st, 1985, the 43-year-old oceanographer was lying in his bunk aboard the research vessel Mural. Ballard had led the ship to the North Atlantic in search of the wreck of the Titanic, but despite searching for more than a week, his team's camera-outfitted robot had yet to find anything other than sand and other gadgets at the bottom of the ocean. Robert Ballard went on a mission in hopes to find the Titanic, and eventually he did succeed. Ballard's military project left him with 12 days to look for the Titanic, but it had also given him an idea for a new search technique. While photographing Thresher and Scorpion, he'd noticed that the current had carried small bits of wreckage from the ships as they fell to the sea floor, creating a long chain of debris. With this in mind, he decided not to search for the Titanic's hull. Instead, he would use the Argo to scour the bottom of the ocean for its much larger debris trail, which might stretch as far as a mile. Once he found it, he could use it to track down the ship itself. The ship that could never sink was found at the bottom of the North Atlantic Ocean on September 1st, 1985, which marked an iconic moment in history. Although it took over 73 years to find, the journey to search for it and how it actually ended up sinking gave everyone a better idea of how this claimed ship that could never sink, well, sunk. Not only was the fall of the Titanic discovery important in the 80s, but so was the fall of the Berlin Wall. From 1961 to 1989, a massive and imposing concrete wall stood between West Germany, which was controlled by America, France, and England, and East Germany, which was controlled by the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, also known as the USSR. This wall was a stark display of communist power. To this day, it remains a symbol of the Cold War, the struggle between the US and the Soviet Union. For the people of Germany at that time, the wall represented more than just the Cold War. The Berlin Wall meant to many people a loss in human rights and freedom. Very few were allowed into East Germany, and essentially no one was permitted to leave, except a handful of important officials. Many families were separated and died in the attempt to reunite. It was a bleak time for many. Once the Berlin Wall fell, Germany celebrated. It was the beginning of the end for the Soviet Union and the communist regime. The third component featured on our mural is the explosion of the Challenger space shuttle. The Challenger was one of NASA's greatest achievements, but also one of the greatest tragedies. On January 28, 1986, the space shuttle exploded 73 seconds after lifting off, killing its 7 crew members. We chose to feature this event because it forever changed the space program. The launch of the shuttle unfolded on live television, with an audience comprised primarily of children. The explosion was eventually determined to be caused by a combination of cold weather and design flaws, and the disaster grounded the space program for nearly 3 years. As a result of the Challenger's explosion, NASA scientists made over 100 changes to spacecrafts and changed its culture to pay more attention to concerns. Our fourth component is the movie The Little Mermaid. In this movie, Ariel is a teenager, restless and wanderlust, and fascinated by the gizmos and gadgets that have fallen from her sky, the water's surface. She dreams of joining the magical creatures up on land, and this being a Disney animated feature, she sings about her struggles. This movie was released in 1989 and was the start of the Disney animation renaissance. This started their song base. Most of the songs in the movie had to do with Ariel's struggles and what she wanted, which started a reoccurring theme in future Disney movies. For example, The Lion King. Simba's main concern is how he just can't wait to be king. The Little Mermaid is what sparked these themes in the iconic Disney movies that everyone knows, and it has great significance within the Disney business. Moving on to more political topics, we will now be talking about important roles of government in the 80s. So, our final component, prominently featured in our mural, is the portraits of the 3 presidents who served throughout the decade. The decade began with Jimmy Carter, who served for the first year of the 80s. After his term ended, in 1981 he ran for re-election, but was defeated by Ronald Reagan. Reagan is featured next to Carter and served as the 40th U.S. president from 1981 to 1989. After surviving an assassination attempt in 1981, Reagan became an extremely popular president. He cut taxes and increased defense spending. Reagan also negotiated a nuclear arms reduction agreement with the Soviets and is credited for bringing a quicker end to the Cold War. The final president featured is George H.W. Bush, who served as president for the final year of the decade and administered over the end of the Cold War. When viewing our mural, you will be able to see our 4 main focus points, which consist of the fall of the Berlin Wall, the discovery of the Titanic, the Little Mermaid, and lastly, the devastating explosion of the Challenger. We believe that these moments in our decade single-handedly describe and portray a completely accurate description/reproduction of our specific time period. The Berlin Wall stretches across the entire mural, with the crashed Titanic smack dab in the middle. The Challenger exploding in the sky is brought to life with a dark, starry night sky. The contrast between the night sky and the fire from the exploding Challenger helped to show the suddenness, abruptness, and altogether madness that came with the public's reaction to the story of the Challenger's explosion. Besides the Berlin Wall, Titanic, and Challenger being the centerpieces of the mural, we also include other, but still technological advancements from the decade, starting with the Rubik's Cube and the Little Mermaid floating at the bottom of our mural next to the newly introduced Macintosh. We as a team have chosen to incorporate some of the presidents' faces on our Berlin Wall, in hopes of giving those looking at the mural a visual representation of some of the most iconic and life-changing individuals whose presence was felt throughout the 80s. One of our unique and interesting choices to add to our mural was the incorporation of graffiti on the Berlin Wall. This is something that actually happened. The incorporation of graffiti on our mural adds uniqueness that helps to draw in the viewer. All of the moments on our mural come together to help create not one specific message, but rather to help establish the overall theme, idea, representation, feeling, and emotion given by our decade, the 80s.